The Royal Scots, Britain's oldest infantry regiment, proudly served the nation continuously from 1633 until 2006, when it was merged with the other Scottish regiments into the Royal Regiment of Scotland. This film records the memories of soldiers and their families who served in the regiment following the end of the Second World War in 1945. It concentrates on the wider memories of Royal Scots and their families of what made our regiment so very special to all who served in it or with it over those years. During this time, the Royal Scots were deployed all around the globe. We will hear the memories of soldiers who served in Korea, Egypt, Cyprus, Aden, Germany, the Falklands, Northern Ireland, Bosnia, and Iraq. Regimental life is far more than just active service. Royal Scots share a proud history of tradition, music, and sport. And at the heart of the regiment are the families, supported by the wider Royal Scots regimental family. All these soldiers and their families proudly served their king, their queen, and their country over the last 60 years. Now they reflect on what made their life with the Royal Scots so very special.
When World War II started, I was 10 years old, and I was due to come away to Edinburgh to school, but unfortunately my mother would not let me do so, and I remained in Bromley and went to Bromley Grammar School. During the war, I was a very keen Boy Scout, and also as a result of that, a civil defence messenger. And I have memories of myself on my bicycle going round delivering messages from bomb site to bomb site and so on. The war finished in 1945, and I, at that time, had got a one-year gap before I had to do my national service. At that time, I had no idea that I was going to stay in the army, and after doing some basic training at Maidstone in Kent, I was sent on to the NCO Development School at Elgin in Scotland. And at that time, I requested to be a Royal Scot rather than a member of the General Service Corps. You may wonder why I said the Royal Scots. My father had served in the 2nd Battalion during the 1914-18 war, and he had stayed on until about 1922, when he moved back to London and became a stockbroker.
My father was a prisoner of war when I was very young, so I really didn't meet up with my father until he came out of prisoner of war camp, and which was an interesting experience. The first time I met him, I went off with him and I ran back to my mother in the station hotel in Inverness and said, "Mum, you won't believe it, but Daddy just spent a penny into a basin," because I'd never been into a gents in my life before. But other memories...
Sorry, I'm going to stop.
I got an invitation from Her Majesty in a little brown envelope which said, "You're called up as a national serviceman." And that was in early 1953.
I joined the Royal Scots in 1966. My father had been a serving soldier with the 7th 9th Battalion during the war, and he was very influential in getting me to join. I liked the thought of joining the army. I was involved in boxing, so it was a boxing battalion, so I thought it was a great idea to join the Royal Scots.
I joined the Royal Scots because my great-uncle was a Royal Scot in the First World War, and my father was a Royal Scot in the Second World War. So there was an obvious place for me to go. I was being pressed very hard by my employers, BP, to go to university, and I didn't want to do that. So I saw an advert in a BP Press to say that they were allowing employees to go off for 3 years in treated as equivalent to 3 years at university. So I thought it was a win-win for me.
Well, basically what happened is I moved from Glasgow through to Whitburn in West Lothian when I was about 13. So when I was 16 I wanted to join the army. And the Royal Scots were my local regiment at the time.
I always said I wanted to go to the army, but I couldn't go. My father wouldn't sign my papers. He wouldn't let me go. So I had a job as an apprentice painter up in Edinburgh Castle. When the tattoo was on, I was stenciling all the seats, all the numbers on the seats. It used to be benches, and I spoke to somebody in the castle. So I says to him, I'm going to join the army, and he says, right, go down to Rutland Square. And I went away doing that afternoon, and I went into Rutland Square, and I went in to see the sergeant, and he spoke to me and said, right, he says, you're old enough, he says, to come in yourself now. He says, you don't need your father's signature. And I says, right, fair enough. So I done it all. I done it right away, joined, and I got a letter come to the house telling me what time I was to go to Glencorse. My mother picked up the letter, and she was looking again, and she says to me, look, you'll go, your dad will go daft. We were all sitting around the table, and my mother just said it out of the blue. Andrew's going to the army, and it was not. Oh, my father went nuts. He lifted the plate, he had a plate of mince, he was eating his mince, weak, and it come down my way, it missed me. But eventually, he still never come down into it at all, he didn't want me to join.
We went from Southampton, having had a splendid send-off from Waverley Station. We got to Southampton and got on to the Empire Orwell, which sailed us all the way to Japan. One of my fellow officers, Bill Bramwell, who was a great personal friend of mine as well, I knew that he knew and I knew that his mother and father, who were acrimoniously divorced, were both living in Cairo and were both coming to say goodbye to him on the boat. So Bill established himself on one deck, and I established myself by the gangplank, and at the right moment when it was right for the changeover, there was a wave like that, and one parent went off one way and the other one went on to see Bill. And the last I remember was, as we were going through the Suez Canal, on the right-hand side, as we were sailing down, was a car, open-top car, and in it was Bill Bramwell's mother and his sister waving to him. Unfortunately, as we found out later, they were never to see him again.
We went across to Korea, landed at Busan, and put on an American Army train and sent up to the battalion, the Royal Scots. The positions we were in were just about 30 yards in front of us, where the border was, between the two, the north and the south.
On the way, I can well recall that we were listening on the very rusty communication radio on the ship, the coronation of Her Majesty the Queen. It was very moving, and we all stood to attention at the right time, and we all sang God Save the Queen at the right time, and it drew our memory to the fact that there was going to be a Royal Scot party, including the colour, on parade in the Mall, and that the colour was carried by Robert Richardson.
The battalion arrived in Korea in early July, when the fighting was still on, and we were in a reserve position well behind the front line. I was sent forward entirely on my own to gain experience from the battalion at the front. I made my way through the various echelons till I was in the forward company on the Hook. The forward platoon was just right close to the enemy, the North Koreans, 100 yards away. My arrival coincided with the rain, the worst rain for many years. And very quickly, the shelters that had been built all caved in, and I spent the night, up to my knees in waterlogged trenches, with the rain pouring down. I remember this, not because of the discomfort, which was intense, but because I was a stranger amongst strangers. No one I knew. They were far too concerned with their own problems to bother about me. And so I learnt the hard way the value of belonging to a team, esprit de corps, and morale.
The climate was very hot in the summer and very cold in the winter, and we had to have special clothing for both. I remember that in the winter we wore string vests and long johns underneath our uniform, and in the summer even a pair of shorts was almost too much. And we all had things called heat space heaters, which blew a very fine spray of petrol into a drum which heated it up. And they were frankly very, very good and kept us lovely and warm in the winter months. But you had to be very careful because the petrol was outside, there was a rubber tubing coming down in, and there was the heater. And unfortunately, very, very, very sadly, on one night, Bill Bramall, who was at that time a part of support company, went back to his tent, and he tripped on the stair as he went in, dislodged the pipe, and I'm afraid burned himself to death, which was simply terribly sad for the whole of the battalion. The whole place was in mourning, to be perfectly honest. We weren't fighting. It wasn't in war that it was done, and it was just a horrible, horrible accident to an extremely, extremely popular officer. And then his body was taken by the Padre and a small detachment of representative Royal Scots down to Busan, where there was the war cemetery. And there Bill lies from that day to this.
One day I was in one of these, I call them holes in the ground, with another guy. And then this guy, he pulled out his wallet thing, took out a photograph. He said, "Hey, look at that. That's my wife and my daughter." Oh. And I said, "Oh, she looks nice." Alf, his name was Alf. He says, "I'm going to marry her one day." "Oh, are you?" He says, "Yeah. Yeah."
My husband knew about me because he met my stepfather in Korea, and he was shown a photograph of my mother and myself, and he liked the looks of me and decided that he was going to marry me. And my stepfather told him, "No way."
On Saturday, the 12th of June, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Scots, took part in a farewell parade in Korea. Major General Murray, GOC, the 1st Commonwealth Division, took the salute. During the last week in June, the 1st Battalion, the Royal Scots, embarked at Busan for the Middle East after 11 months' service in Korea. During that time, regular soldiers and national servicemen alike had undergone rigorous training in all weathers and now are a fit and efficient unit capable of meeting all eventualities.
Yes, we were recalled to the battalion early from Canada because we were selected to go to Aden. So from being in about the coldest place on earth, within 2 months we were in the hottest place.
There was a sentry post which we used to have to man up, and it was just on a little tiny sort of bit that jutted out from the jubble. And on the first night, when the guys came back after dark, one said, "Sir, you won't believe it. I've just seen an old man come out of the cave." I said, "Right, well, we'll go and find him." So I went on duty and waited, sent the next sentry back after 1 hour, and out of the cave came this old man with a long white hair and a white beard. So I shone my torch at him and realized it wasn't a man. It was a baboon. And this baboon had been left behind, and when he saw somebody leaving, he would come out and look for food where the cooking area was. So from that moment onwards, we used to feed him every night.
We were deployed to a tented camp down near Aden, which was dreadful. But every few weeks or months, we were sent up country to the Radfan, where the dissidents were. The Radfan was very mountainous, and the dissidents were very hard to see or find.
It had been raining, which it rains about 3 days a year, and in the heavy rainfall, all our mortar pits were full, the ammunition was underwater, so I said, "Right, we'll move everybody into a house." And we used to clear a house with a can of petrol. I said, "Right, petrol's in the house now, good." So I went and stood by the door, threw a match into the house to flash burn it, and the whole house exploded. And I was blown through the air for about 30 meters, and rather badly burnt. And the house went on burning for about a day because he misunderstood a can of petrol. I meant a Coca-Cola can. He used a 4.5-gallon jerry tank of petrol. And as I lay in the sick bay, the chap said, "Mr. Ritchie, you're not going to die. We're going to fly you back to Aden." And I remember saying, "Please don't worry, I can make my own way."
We were going to Cyprus for 2 years as a sunshine tour by way of some form of a more relaxed and easy time. And as I say, we were all looking forward to 2 years in the sunshine. However, Aoka appeared again after a long period of absence or underground work, and they attempted a coup d'etat on the Cyprus government, which at the time, Cyprus was all one island. Macarius was the president, and he fled in the sight of these Aoka men, and he went to Paphos, and then the Turks invaded northern Cyprus from Turkey.
Got a flight date for the 15th of August, but a couple of days before we were due to fly, Major Watson, who was a Royal Scot, came to the door and said, "I'm sorry, the Turks have invaded, and you're going, but your family's not going." So I had a 4-year-old son, a 7-year-old daughter, and the 7-year-old daughter was really looking forward to go to Cyprus in the sun. But anyway, I ended up going. All my boxes had went with the battalion, so the wife was left in an empty quarter in Tidworth.
We had one box that we kept, and that had all the essentials in, which was the hoover, the floor polisher, because you had to leave your quarter nice and clean. So that was an essential to me. And, things that the children needed, really.
One night there was a dance on at the RAF station in Lossiemouth. And so my stepfather said, "You can't go unless some of the mess members go." So I said, "Well, go and tell Steve Simpson that I'm out here and I would like to see him and ask him something." So, of course, Steve Simpson came out trying to sort himself out. And I said, "I'm Alf Piper's daughter, and I would like to go to the dance, and I would like it if you would take us." So he did. Steve and I obviously fell in love very quickly. We were engaged within 6 weeks. We were married in Elgin. We'd only known each other for 3 months, so we got married, and then he immediately left to go to the Suez Canal with Royal Scots, of course.
I think wives and children are an enormously powerful and important part of regimental life. I mean, up to now, of course, infantry soldiering's been done by men, so I will use that context when I speak about it. In the future, it's going to be men and women. But the men just couldn't even train at home and abroad at the intensity with which we train, and certainly couldn't deploy for some of the operations on which we've deployed without the support of the families back home. And when one belongs to a truly extraordinarily cohesive organisation like the Royal Scots as a regiment, when the 1st Battalion is nested in that regimental sense of identity and support, then it all comes vibrantly to life. And it's the polar opposite of a sense that one's doing it all by oneself.
Well, the family was most important because I was away and my wife was left with the children, and she got tremendous support from our friends and, including this, the regimental family, because I was abroad and she was left at home looking after the children.
My father actually was sent a telegram. He was in Tripoli preparing for the invasion of Sicily, and a signal went through saying 1 small kit bag has arrived, which meant that my mother had had a daughter. If I'd been a boy, I would have been a large kit bag. When the battalion came back from Trieste to Glencorse, I went to the Auchendeni Primary School, which was quite a shock, but I soon got into the swing of things, and I learnt about jammy pieces to take to school every day, and I learnt how to fight the school bully called Follopslaw. And I can remember that day in the hall when he was in his battle dress, saying goodbye to us with his kit. Up till then, I'd always had a memory of a rather dashing officer in tartan trews, and I was 9. Sorry, I told you to get emotional. And I was 9, and I was old enough to know that he was going to join the Korean War and he was going to fight. And that's probably when I grew up.
I got married in 1982, and that's wrong.
Right, good one.
I got married in September 1981, and we were based at Ballykinler. So I went home, got married, and then was given a married quarter. My first son was born in Northern Ireland, in Downpatrick. The second son was born while we were in Kirknewton, in Bangor. And my other 2 sons were born when we went to Verl, in Germany. But they loved it. I mean, even till today, they'll still keep in touch with their old friend, the Pads brats, as they were called.
It's a wonderful feeling to have the family of the Royal Scots around you. And it's a wonderful feeling to be a part of something. It's even the children now, our families, feel the same thing. They are a part of something. They love being Royal Scots. They love telling people their father was a Royal Scot. At the very beginning, when my son was on his way, the battalion was on an exercise. And my stepfather was with me, and he stopped a jeep going past and said, "Crystal's in labour." And the whole Royal Scots were in on this. I was in labour, they dropped me off at the hospital, that sort of thing. And that is the feeling that they're there for you. You, the soldier, you were together somewhere. And the wives behind were worried about you all. And we all bonded with that, and we worried about all of you being away.
Well, I used to write home, and it was the old, what they called blueies, the airmail bluey envelopes. And now and again a phone, but you had to queue up and book calls.
Well, at the time we were using the bluey envelopes that you were issued. If you went to the post office, we used to be able to get so many of them. And then phone. So he would either phone me, and now we have to make arrangements as to when we were going to phone, because we didn't have a phone in the house, so we had to stand down by the telephone box and wait there until the phone come through.
Well, my two children, Helen was born when we were in Osnabrück, but she was born in BMH Munster. And so Irma was very much like the other wives. We were off on exercises, not Highland in those days, fortunately. And so no grandma around the corner, no sister down the road. You looked after yourself, but very much looked after by the regiment as well.
Yeah, moving around from one quarter to another was a bit of a rush sometimes, because you went along back off exercise. And in them days, in the 60s, 70s, your quarter had to be immaculate before you moved out. And I can mind, especially the cooker, being inside the cooker with electric drill with a wire brush on, getting all the fat out of the cooker.
Well, of course, it is a distinctly peripatetic lifestyle. So I served 33 years in both regiments, and Lorna, my wife, and I are living in our 20th house in 25 years of marriage, and some of them in home and abroad, and most of them have been great fun. But our children were getting fed up with always being the new kid in class.
About 7 or 8 different schools they went to, and I think that was... I think that might have been a little bit traumatic for them, because they didn't know what they were going to when they were going to those schools, you know. But at the same time, they were moving as a battalion, so all the friends were going. So they kept the same friends at the schools, you know. So I mean, I think really that worked out well for them.
The resilience of the parents is unbelievable. They did this not every 2 or 3 years, but in many cases, twice a year, 3 times a year. The wives were unbelievable in their strength, and the strength they gave their husbands.
I think the main point about the families, not only, of course, that they were tremendous supporters of their menfolk, but also they were largely responsible for bringing up their children. And certainly in my own case, I know that my wife brought up our 2 children almost single-handed, because I was forever away on something or another. And so the families are a very, very important part of the regimental system.
Half the time we were away all the time, you know. You were away in exercise and you were away with the band. So if they were away for 6 months, you were away for 9 months again. And it must have been hard. When I came back, my son didn't even know who I was. Aye.
Well, we arrived in Berlin after a tortuous journey from Elgin, where we were 5 hours late in Edinburgh because of snow, and all the families waiting to say goodbye to sons and whatnot. And then we travelled to the Hook of Holland, and then up to Helmstedt, where we took the military train. And in those days, the military train travelled at only 12 miles per hour. And so it's slow going. Halfway through the journey, we heard the bugle being played. And I was in a compartment with the company sergeant major and another couple of sergeants. And he said, the regimental sergeant major is calling for sergeant majors. So off he went, and he came back. And he said, right, we'll now start blancoing our equipment and bulling our boots, so that when we arrived in Charlottenburg Station in Berlin, we'll be, as we always are, in the Royal Scots, ready for anything. And so we arrived in a blizzard in Charlottenburg Station with nobody in sight, and got onto our coaches, marching behind both bands, of course, onto our coaches, and nobody to see us. And that was the start of Berlin.
In Germany, we had 432s, and I can remember it was a brigade exercise, and we camped up in these woods, and wherever you went, you always had a German van that followed you and selling you beer. So we bought a couple of cases of beer, and they were called the little snobby bottles. And Hereford pills were in a little yellow box, and we called them yellow handbags. So we were in this wood with a campfire. We were going to drink the beer, then we got a tip-off that the Major was coming round to look for beer in the 432s by his driver. So we hid the beer. What we done was we got shovels, lifted the fire up, dug a hole, put the beer in, and put the fire back on top of the beer. And he came round, obviously didn't find the beer in the wagon, the 432s. And we were flapping in case the beer would explode with the heat off the fire. But anyway, then the next minute we got ordered to move, so we quickly put the fire out, jumped in our 432s, and left. So somewhere in Salthouse training area, there's a couple of cases of yellow handbags full of beer lying.
We were out the night out, and we were doing it to a pub called the Dab. We tried to get into this other pub, but that was all used by the officers and whatever, sergeant majors and that, and they wouldn't let us in. So they told us to go on a bike, and so we had a long way from where the pub was up to the camp. So we were walking by, and I spotted a horse in the field. There was a big white one. The next minute, there was another two of them, so there were three. There were 6 of us, so I thought, right, 2 in each, that'll do no problem. We were on the horses, and away we went, no saddles, no none, away up, right up through the married quarters that went up, sitting on the horse. So it gets to the barracks, gets up the top. So I'm at the big barriers down where I was sitting on the horses. So I says to him, open the barrier, we're walking in. Again, he's like that, no chance. He says, just put the horses back to where you got them and get in here. I says, no. So I tried to with the horse forward, and it wouldn't have jumped the barrier. It was no chance it would jump the barrier. So eventually he called the guard out, and he just said, he says to me, he shouted, right, Wyatt Earp, you and John Wayne and the rest of the cowboys get into the barracks and leave the horses where they were. It must have been about 7 o'clock in the morning, maybe a wee bit earlier. And I hears this banging and I'm sort of looking, and there's Corporal Mains and Tom Heaps. They've got buckets and shovels with the brushes and that, and they were wearing gas masks, right, the two of them. And they're banging up and I'm waking us up again. So of course, you wake up in the morning, and I'm looking at, well, there's this big horse's arse. It's right in front of me, this horse. It was, I'm saying to myself, the tail was going like this, and of course, oh, hell. The manure was like that. The flare was all covered in pee, everything. So I'm sitting, and of course, they've got the gas masks on, that's why they had the gas, because the sail was stinking. So I'm in the single Peter, and he's like that. They're shouting through the thing, they're like that. Right, get this bloody sail sorted out now. You've got till 7:30. So then the CEO, he says, right, I've had the chap that the horses belong to. He's been up here looking for his horses. We've told him they're there. The horses there. He says, they're all getting charged, and they charged us for rustling. we go down for rustling, and 7 days RPs, right?
We were on our way back from Canada after having done a winter warfare course in preparation for our next posting, and we were told on the flight when we were coming home that we were moving to Northern Ireland on an emergencies tour. we did not know a great deal about it at that time, as no one did. So it was something really strange to us. We were going to Northern Ireland, part of our own country, and we were going to be doing security duties out there. So it was very much quite a surprise to us all. I don't say we were afraid, but it was certainly something that was going through our minds all the way back home.
When we deployed there, we were, my platoon area was Ballymurphy and Turf Lodge, which are fairly notorious. And we were engaged in quite a ferocious riot on Easter Monday. And that went on for about 4 days. And the first riot we were in, there wasn't enough batons and shields to go around. And we were having to take snatch squads with little success. On day 3, the Reverend Ian Paisley decided to come down and provide support for an isolated police station right opposite the Ballymurphy estate. And a whole lot of laddos appeared, and there was me and a Land Rover with a driver and a radio operator between Dr. Ian Paisley and the rioters. And I went over to arrest him, or threatened him with arrest. And he's a big man, and I'm only 5'6". So I was standing up. Now, listen here, Mr. Paisley. And of course, he gave me quite a haranguing. And then a missile came between his nose and my nose and landed on the bonnet of his car, whereupon he left the riot to me, which was very kind of him.
But it was a very interesting period, and I remember watching riots at Ballymurphy, and the famous incident when a whole lot of Orangemen came down on the Springfield Road, which is mainly Republican. And when they came there, all the locals from there belted them with stones. They replied back, and the Royal Scots got in between them. So on one side, we were being stoned by the good Republicans, on the other side by the loyal Orangemen. And the cartoon appeared in the paper the next day showing a Royal Scot being belted with stones from both sides.
For the first part of the tour, they were extremely kind to us, and any time we were on foot patrol, or indeed in the vehicles, they would ask us to stop, and they would give us tea and sandwiches and biscuits, and they were quite happy to sit and chat with us there for the duration. So we seemed to be getting on very well with them. We thought we were winning them over quite well, but very soon afterwards, the tea and sympathy didn't last.
I still retain really vivid memories of that first operational tour, West Belfast, 1987 and into 1988. Of course, I'd grown up with the Troubles in Northern Ireland pretty much dominating the news headlines. So I was acutely aware of it all. And then I have vivid memories of deploying to Belfast. I remember the smells of coal smoke hanging in the drizzle in December 1987. Still, whenever I smell that, less and less now, of course, it takes me back to there. Some of the music that was being played up these alleyways and some of the taunts that we would get from some people in West Belfast at the time. I remember just how very busy we were. I remember about 2 weeks into the tour, living off about 3 or 4 hours sleep a night.
When we were stationed in Ballykinler, it was like a fortress. The families were all inside the camp. There was 40 or 50 houses that housed the majority of us. And life went on. Life within the barracks itself was very good. However, the families didn't get very many opportunities at all to get out and about to Belfast and other parts of Northern Ireland, which they would have liked to. I think part of it was the dangers that they were afraid of, and they basically decided to stay within the barracks itself.
I remember, of course, an extraordinary period that, in terms of the biggest events, started with the SAS killing the 3 terrorists in Gibraltar, the violence that accompanied the return of their coffins back through Dublin and into Belfast, the efforts the IRA took to get revenge on us, and just how dangerous, physically dangerous it was at that stage. the phenomenal professionalism shown in A Company when an IRA terrorist was killed by one of our junior NCOs. The crazy episode with Michael Stone throwing grenades around the city cemetery. And then, of course, the utterly tragic episode of the two signals, Corporals Howes and Woods, being so brutally murdered. And all of that unfolding in the relatively short window of 4.5 months.
Yes, I did feel frightened. And the reason for that is that you are in a situation where there is terrorists that are about there, and their aim in life is to kill you, is to get you out of the way. And of course, soldiers were frightened. They didn't show it very often, but deep down they all were. I'm sure.
The soldiers were absolutely extraordinary. I mean, we all know that Scottish soldiers can be a bit of a handful. You know, they've got plenty of spark, and in barracks, you know, they can sometimes cause some administrative type of problems. But goodness me, when they focus for operations in the training phase and the deployment itself, technically their professionalism. There are a lot of specific drills and skills to learn for operating in the dangerous environment of West Belfast at that stage. How technically competent they came in all of that, and their sort of inexhaustible energy and their bravery was absolutely extraordinary. And I learnt a great deal from them, as well as learning a great deal about myself.
Sport brings out, first of all, a lot of discipline with the soldiers in the sport that they're taking part in. And that, of course, will be transferred quite clearly to the soldiers' ability in the field to accept quick directions and orders. They bond very well today on the football field, the rugby field, and the boxing ring, and they actually take that into operations.
Sport was a huge part. When I joined, they discovered I was a footballer. I'd captained the rest of Scotland schools against the Glasgow schools, in hoping to go to Wembley to play the English schools. Discovered I was a month too old, but there we are. But sport was huge. I started off at Glencore's barracks in 1954, playing with many professionals. So sport was a huge part, and played sport almost every day at the depot, because you could.
The football was absolutely fantastic in Vero. I mean, we had Major MacDonald, the Moon, as it was called. Most of the sergeant majors were scared for him. So we would get the time off to train. I mean, there was one occasion we were training for about 6 months, so it was a wee bit like being a professional footballer. So that's fantastic. But football was a massive part of my life in the regiment.
When you join the army, you have to be part of a team. You can't be a loner, or you can, but you go off to another regiment to do that. But you have to be part of a team, and I think that's it. And there is an instinctive, nobility about sport. And I think it's the same in the army. We have a nobility that is not much appreciated, but is there. And I think the two go side by side, yes.
We did a whole lot of things for the 350th anniversary. My father had been much involved with the 300th anniversary in 1933, so I was fortunate to be the commanding officer in 1983. So we had this big parade, and for the first time ever, we fired a feu de joie, which had never been done by anybody before. In fact, all it involved really was, as the soldiers were all lined up in front of the Queen, they all raised their rifles, and starting at one end, they fired one shot each all the way down. It was very spectacular. And it was very important that the people further down the line didn't start firing before their turn came up. So we practiced this quite a lot up at Kirk Newton. And it was a success. It all went off very well. The final event of the 350th, which was the biggest event really, was the march through Edinburgh, when we had the 1st Battalion, led by the Pipes and Drums, the Gurkhas, the Newfies, the Canadian Scots, and all the retired old and bold soldiers and officers. And so we had this enormous parade that stretched from the Scottish office way out into the bush somewhere. Quite impossible to command them in any way at all. So I just said, well, when you see the people in front stepping off, you step off in front in time with them. And so we all marched off. We went all the way down Princess Street, and the parade was judged to be a success. And all the old and bold who were there, ready to criticise, felt that they couldn't.
And already Princess Anne, accompanied by Lieutenant Colonel Ashmore, the commanding officer, seems at home with all the generations of the Royal Scots family. She brings a twinkle to the eyes of many an old soldier.
We met the Princess Royal. She came to Kirk Newton. I was chosen alongside some other wives to meet her.
Was it a special occasion for you?
Yes, it was. It was, because it's not that often that you meet the royal family, do you? You know, so yeah. Especially Colonel-in-Chief, you know, I mean, that's the one that you want to meet, isn't it?
We went up to Ballata to do the Royal Guard. And when you used to, on a Sunday, you went to church at Crathy with the Queen. And then they had the Gillies Ball, but I hated dancing. So I said, I don't want to do that. So I volunteered to do guard at Victoria Barracks.
I mean, the Gillies Ball was fantastic. It was great to get, and a privilege to get an invite for the Queen. And on that evening, when it came to the dashing White Sergeant, Princess Anne actually came over, because it was the females to ask the males to dance. So she was looking for a dashing White Sergeant, who I was.
Oh, sorry.
Unfortunately.
Sorry, we better start again.
We'll do that one again.
Yeah, just start by saying, and she was looking for a dashing White Sergeant.
Right, and she was looking for a dashing White Sergeant, but unfortunately I had already asked another lady I'd already been asked by another lady to dance and accepted. So I had to decline Princess Anne, which was gut-wrenching, to be honest.
With advice from my daughter, I was told that I had to appear on the London March or Save the Regiment, which I did. And it was a very successful march in itself. And then she persuaded me that I should come to Edinburgh for the Save the Regiment's March in 2004, which I did, and joined the regiment on the march at that time. Helen, my daughter, joined me at the front of the marching troops. She's very much a Royal Scot. But what I do remember especially is the number of people lining the streets, Princess Street especially, 5 and 6 deep. And as my wife said, many of them crying. And one mustn't cry when one's a Royal Scot. But I felt it. I was emotional that day and thought, why are we doing this? Why are we having to save our regiment? And then, of course, the news came that all in vain, that there would be no more recruiting for the regiments, and that we would become the Royal Regiment of Scotland, which is now, of course, in its own right, a great regiment. And I'm very proud of it. But to no avail, we marched, and keeping good straight lines, and sober and properly dressed.
I had the enormous privilege of being the last commanding officer of 1RS, having been in command for about a month, maybe a little over. Then it came to the point, 28th of March, Royal Scots Regimental Day, very deliberately chosen as the day when the Royal Regiment of Scotland was to be formed. Of course, a decision that was completely beyond our control. We were fiercely proud of the past, but for those of us serving, actually particularly on dangerous operations in Iraq, by that stage it was our job to get things done and get things done properly, not least for the memory of all the Royal Scots that had gone before. And that evening, we had a dinner in an army tent in the desert in a place called Shaiba, just south of Basra. And then there was a most extraordinary electrical storm, absolutely extraordinary. A real racket of thunder and real proper fort lightning. Now, when that played back to the families, back here, we were based in Dreghorn Barracks at the time, so the families were mainly quartered around Redford. Of course, there's a bit of value added to it, and the story eventually became that Fort Lightning hit the tent and ripped it aside just at that midnight, etc. It didn't quite happen as dramatically as that, but the mood in what was an extremely poignant evening anyway, when that electrical storm erupted, was absolutely extraordinary. Anyway, the following day, we held a parade there in the desert, and we ceremoniously drew down the 1RS flag and raised the Royal Regiment of Scotland flag. The Regimental Police Junior NCO who took the flag down, I spoke to afterwards, and he'd been in tears. And I said, this is hugely powerful and moving for us all, but it's particularly affected you. And he said, yes, this regiment is my family. He was an orphan. And he joined the regiment, and he said, this is it. The Royal Scots is my family. And that just showed what it meant to everybody. Yep.
When I finished and went back to BP, I really, really missed it, because I missed so much the feeling of camaraderie, the esprit de corps, if you like, just the sheer joy of doing something that meant something.
Well, my service in the military, there's no question about it, has made me the person I am, for better or for worse, I suppose. Wow, does one learn a lot about human beings, about the human condition, what makes human beings tick. One learns a great deal about oneself. And I think no matter what one does in life, almost without exception, it's good to involve interacting with other human beings.
Self-employed now as a driving instructor. Whilst I was working my last 2 years with the Territorial Army at East Clement Street, I had a visit for Tony Reid, and Tony had mentioned that he was working with BSM at the time, so that sort of laid the seed. The skills that were transferable were instruction. I've basically been instructing since I was 17-year-old, and communication, good communication skills with individuals. So I find it quite easy to communicate with other individuals, from 17-year-old up to pensioners. I
had the most incredible personal development opportunity, and I grabbed it with both hands. And it stood me in good stead throughout my career to be able to know that I had been in some tough times and able to live through it and work my way through it. So nothing would ever frighten me from then on. I was able to meet all these challenges with self-confidence, which I believed that the Army had given me.
Why do you think your soldiers followed you?
Curiosity.
I knew you were going to say that. Let me get over the cliff now.
Well, throughout my service, I have always relied on the family, and in particular the regimental family, for advice, help, support, in any way that they can. And it is something that I have appreciated all my life.
I think it's a close-knit family. You know, you all have your own circle of friends, but at the same time, the whole battalion comes together if ever there was any problems, you know. So because the men weren't there, you always had someone to fall back on because your family wasn't there, your own family wasn't there, you know, like your parents, your brother, your sister. So to me, at that time that you were in the forces, the people around you are your family.
I mean, I think once a royal, always a royal applies not only to the Royal Scots serving, but actually to the families, because we were the family, and we were far away from our families in England and Scotland. So we just became one big family, and that has always stayed with me.
The regiment is everything to me. I have had opportunities to go elsewhere, and I wouldn't. My grandmother told me I was going to be a soldier, and I took to it. I loved it. I love straight lines. I love ironing. I do all the ironing at home. This is ridiculous. But I think we have standards, and my standard is that every couple of weeks I bull 2 or 3 pairs of shoes, and I go to church regularly every week, and I'm known as Mr. Shiny Shoes. Well, I don't mind that at all. I think it's a reflection on the way I've been brought up properly by my family, and especially in the regiment, because we have high standards, and I would never dream of going anywhere shoddy.
My single most vivid memory is of the wonderful Colonel Martin Gibson. And he sat me down and he asked me a bit about myself and he told me a bit about the battalion, and then he simply said, never forget why you're here. You're here to serve the Jocks. And it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I thought, yeah, I really want to be part of this team.
I'm proud of having served with the Royal Scots and the history that we obviously continued. And basically, once a Royal Scot, always a Royal Scot. I think the history of the regiment's important to be carried on and to be passed on to future generations, so they know basically what we've done to keep the country safe.